In a previous lesson, we were talking about the 4 different deployment models that we'll find out there in the cloud computing world. Public cloud, private cloud, community cloud, and then the one that combines all 3 of those others, hybrid cloud. Thanks to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've been helping us refine our definition here, and we're going to add to that in this next lesson by discussing the 3 service models that we'll find out there in the cloud world. And the idea behind the service models is just like we saw with our deployment models and the buffet analogy that I made, we have a lot of options. And as consumers and as businesses, we can choose between 2 different factors: the amount of control that we need to have and the amount of responsibility that we want to take on. Keeping in mind that one of the big value propositions of using a cloud service is that we can pass a lot of that responsibility onto the cloud service provider, so long as we don't lose too much control as a part of giving up that responsibility. In the broad world of cloud computing, we're going to find 3 different service models. The first one is software as a service, and you'll see me using this SaaS acronym here. The second one is platform as a service, PaaS. And then the final one on here at the bottom is infrastructure as a service. Let's take a closer look at these 3. In order to understand the 3 different service models, I'm going to go ahead and draw a couple of different responsibility areas that might be taken care of by the consumer or by the provider. Starting off down here at the bottom, the first one we have is the physical location. You want to think about the actual building that houses and holds all of your information technology tools. The next layer up are the servers, the storage, and the networks that live within your physical location. After that, there is managing the virtualization layer, in particular, who controls the hypervisor. After that, we have the operating systems that will live on top of the hypervisors. This is where you're stepping into the insides of a virtual machine at this point. So you do want to point out that this is kind of that abstraction layer that happens between the hypervisor and the virtual machines that live on top of it. The next layer on up on top of the operating system is the runtime. And the best way to kind of think of this is to imagine what necessary pieces you need to run the next layer, which is the software and the applications themselves. Just like a DVD or a Blu-ray disc or a PlayStation game, you have to have the right sort of player to be able to use that format. In that same way, the software that you're running also needs a number of supporting tools called the runtime to make sure that the application can work. And that brings us up to the very tip-top piece here, and that is the data that lives within the software. Now that we have all of the different service layer responsibilities mapped out, we can talk about how this gets divided up between what the customer is responsible for and what the provider is responsible for. Keeping in mind here, friends, that I'm using these terms kind of generically. Customer means the person who is consuming the service and using it. The provider is the person who's managing it and offering it. If this is an internal network, then there may not be any customer-provider concept. It could be administrators and users instead. With infrastructure as a service, the provider is going to be delivering everything from the hypervisor layers on down. This means that they're managing the physical servers and all of the networking devices. They're also managing the data center, taking care of the day-to-day handling and care and feeding of those physical machines. The customer then is responsible for and has control over the virtual machines that they run on top of the infrastructure that the provider is making available. Infrastructure as a service is going to offer the maximum amount of control for the customer because it gives us the most layers of the stack in which the customer is able to directly administer things. With the platform as a service model, we see that the provider is now shifting up even farther to deliver the runtime and much of the virtualization environment and also the infrastructure that the customers are going to be using. This leaves the customers largely focusing on what sort of software they want to run inside of the environment, and of course working with and managing the data that lives with that software. There is a shift in control and responsibility here. The customer is giving up control of the runtime and the operating system. But remember, that is by design. We wanted to focus on our software more and not have to manage all those other underworking parts. And then finally, the software as a service model is where the provider is delivering everything all the way up here into the software layer, including all of the virtualization and the infrastructure as well. This leaves the customer focusing just on the data and the use of the software that's being provided. In the end, this is the maximum level of pushing responsibility off onto the provider. And the caveat to this model is that the customer now has lost control over any of the specifics of administering all of that other infrastructure. It's a good and bad thing at the same time. To kind of tie this back to real-world examples of what these services look like, we'll start off with software as a service. Great examples of this are going to be things like webmail Anytime you're using a web browser to interact with an application that you don't run and own yourself, that's definitely a public software as a service example. Mobile applications that you might find in the Google Play Store or maybe in the Apple Store, those are also great examples of software as a service. You don't have to write the software, you can just use it. And another one that's near to my heart is streaming music. So if you're ever listening to iTunes or Spotify, those are all software as a service products that you're using. You don't have to run the infrastructure, but you still get to listen to all the tasty jams. Now, software as a service does not have to be internet accessible. It could be something that's more like a software subscription model, such as Office 365 or one of my favorites, the Adobe products, such as right now I'm using Adobe Illustrator that's using a cloud license. It's not that Adobe is running the software for me, it's just that they're offering this flexible month-by-month licensing model. And that has a ton of value in itself. I don't have to pay one massive lump sum fee for it. Instead, I can pay on a month-by-month basis as I need it. When there's a month that I don't need the Adobe software, I don't pay for it. That's part of the beauty of software as a service. The next one on here, platform as a service, is a bit trickier. What I usually try to get people to think about is we are building from pieces. Generally, the providers are going to give us components that we can use to assemble larger things from, such as like Legos and building blocks. They don't tell you necessarily what to build with them. It's up to your own imagination. So this could be as difficult as writing an application in Java or Python. Those are all platforms that we could write software on. Or it could be as simple as something like using a YouTube page. That is a platform as a service. You can host your videos there. YouTube will make them available, and they'll even give you a little player that you can go and embed on your own web pages to make that video available. I provided the video content, but YouTube provided all of the platform services that make the hosting and the delivery of it possible. So this makes platform as a service easily one of the most powerful layers available because it gives us the value of hosted, managed services through a cloud service provider, while also being able to do a large level of customization on our own. And the final one, infrastructure as a service, this is going to be the one that most organizations are going to get started with because they already have a lot of virtual infrastructure already. So this is why I often refer to this one as virtualization as a service, because that's really what we're thinking about. And for many large organizations that are already running their own enterprise networks with their own virtual machines inside of it, it can be a pretty simple lift and shift to go to a cloud service provider's environment and move that virtual machine over there as a part of the migration to their service. In this way, it allows organizations that have already invested in this technology to maintain a lot of what they already have, while still being able to move into this more flexible cloud services model. So in the end, the three different service models, software, platform, and infrastructure as a service, gave us a trade-off between control and responsibility. Keeping in mind that part of the value proposition was to reduce the amount of responsibility required for us to maintain the right amounts of control over our infrastructure. Somewhere in between is a magical opportunity to save money and also improve efficiency and reduce the amount of work that we have to do to deliver our services. In the next lesson, we'll be talking a bit more about Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. We'll talk a little bit about Google Cloud as well, and kind of try to get us thinking back to how do I take all this information that Bart has shared with us and turn it into some sort of an exciting career in the world of cloud computing. I can't wait. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.